St. Mary's Church in Willow Creek, Virginia, shimmered like a summer painting that morning. White roses twined around the old wooden archway. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, scattering jewel-toned reflections onto the stone-tiled aisle. The soft strains of the organ floated in the air, blending with the murmurs of elegantly dressed guests. Today was the wedding of Emily Thompson, the mayor's daughter, and Daniel Carter, a rising young attorney. Nearly the whole town was there, except for the uninvited and those like Melissa Harper, who were only incidentally invited. Melissa, 28, sat quietly in the very last pew, tucked beside her 6-year-old daughter, Linda. Her pale blue cotton dress, clean and neatly pressed, still looked out of place among silk gowns and custom-tailored suits. Linda, in a hand-me-down floral dress, clutched her fabric doll, wide brown eyes taking in everything. Melissa smoothed down her daughter's messy brown curls, trying to stay calm even as her heart raced. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Daniel, the groom, had been a regular at the cafe where Melissa worked. He always ordered his coffee black, tipped generously, and chatted with her about the weather, baseball, or how Linda loved to draw. A week ago, as Melissa wiped down a table, Daniel had said, "You should come to the wedding, Melissa. It'll be fun, and Linda would love the cake." There had been no invitation, just a warm gesture. Melissa agreed, partly because of Daniel's rare kindness, and partly because she wanted Linda to see something beautiful, something their everyday life rarely offered. But now, sitting among guarded smiles and sidelong glances, Melissa felt like she had stepped onto a stage she wasn't meant to be on. She lowered her head, pretending to adjust Linda's dress, hoping no one noticed them. Linda, unaware of her mother's tension, whispered, "Mom, the bride looks like a princess, right?" Melissa forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Very beautiful." The organ music faded as Father Michael stepped up to the altar to begin the ceremony. But before he could speak, a figure appeared in the aisle next to Melissa's pew. Catherine Thompson, the bride's mother, stood there in a pearl-colored gown, her hair perfectly pinned, eyes fixed coldly on Melissa and Linda. Her smile was tight, as if she'd just spotted a stain on an heirloom rug. She gave a subtle nod to a nearby usher, a middle-aged man in a dark suit holding a guest list. "Excuse me," the usher said quietly, bending down to Melissa, his voice polite but firm. "May I see your invitation?" Melissa felt heat flood her cheeks. She gripped Linda's hand and tried to keep her voice steady. I don't have one. Daniel, the groom, invited me personally." The usher frowned, glancing at the list. "Your name, please." "Melissa Harper," she said softly. People nearby had already started to turn, eyes filled with curiosity, judgment. A woman in pearls whispered to her neighbor, and Melissa caught fragments. "Waitress." "Inappropriate." The usher flipped through the list and shook his head. "I'm sorry, but you're not on here. And, the VIP section is full. Perhaps you should—" He trailed off, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here." Melissa swallowed hard, shame rising like a tide. She stood, pulling Linda with her, avoiding eye contact. "It's okay," she murmured, voice shaking. "We'll go." Linda, still clutching her doll, looked up, confused. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" The question cut like a blade. Melissa knelt beside her, hugging her tightly. "No, sweetheart, we didn't do anything wrong. It's just a misunderstanding." But in her heart, she knew it wasn't a mistake. It was the truth she tried to ignore. In Willow Creek, a single mom who lived in a cramped apartment and worked at a diner would always be an outsider. Catherine, standing just feet away, turned back to her circle of friends with a triumphant smile. Melissa heard the brittle laughter, sharp as shattered glass. She straightened, held Linda's hand tightly, and walked down the aisle, her spine stiff even as every part of her wanted to shrink away. The eyes followed them, as if she and her daughter were a stain on the picture-perfect canvas of the day. At the doors of the church, a breeze carried the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. Linda tugged at her mother's hand, voice hopeful. "Mommy, where are we going now? Do we still get cake?" Melissa didn't answer right away. She looked down at her daughter, those bright eyes, that innocent smile, and reminded herself to stay strong, if only for Linda. "We're going home, honey," she said gently but firmly, "and I'll bake you a cake. Better than wedding cake." Linda nodded, though her eyes drifted back toward the church, where the organ music had resumed. Melissa tightened her grip on her daughter's hand and stepped through the arched gate. She didn't see the man in the gray suit watching from a few pews away, his gaze sharp yet conflicted. That man, Mason Whitaker, had seen everything, and soon he would change Melissa's life forever. But that's a story for another day. A light drizzle had begun to fall over the lawn of St. Mary's Church, the raindrops beating on blades of grass and shimmering faintly beneath the soft midday light. Melissa Harper clutched Linda's hand tightly, hurrying through the rose-draped archway, trying to keep her daughter from getting wet. The organ still echoed inside, a beautiful sound, but for them it was only a reminder of the rejection they'd just endured. Melissa bowed her head, her brown hair catching the rain, hiding the redness in her eyes. She didn't want Linda to see her cry. "Mommy, are we still getting cake?" Linda asked, her voice a hopeful whisper tinged with worry. The fabric doll in her hand was damp along one side. Melissa forced a smile and knelt down to adjust her daughter's floral dress. "I'll make you a cake at home, sweetheart. Chocolate, your favorite." Linda nodded, though her eyes drifted back to the stained glass windows of the church that still shimmered in the distance. Just as they stepped past the gate, a little boy, about Linda's age and dressed in a tiny blue suit, ran up from a nearby gathering of guests. He looked at Linda with innocent curiosity and blurted out, "Hey, where's your dad? Why is it just your mom?" The question was childlike, but its impact was sharp. Linda froze, her wide eyes filling with tears. She clutched her doll tighter, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know." Melissa's heart cracked. She pulled Linda into her arms, holding her close. "It's okay, baby. You don't have to answer." But Linda began to cry, soft sobs lost in the patter of rain. Melissa stroked her daughter's hair, trying to keep her voice even, but inside she was reeling with shame and hurt. In Willow Creek, questions like that were never harmless. A single mother was always a subject of scrutiny, sometimes pity, sometimes scorn. Then a calm and steady voice rose from behind them. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" Melissa looked up to see a man in a charcoal gray suit walking toward them. He was well-dressed but unpretentious, in his mid-30s, with dark hair neatly combed and eyes so deeply blue they seemed almost steel gray. His presence cut clean through the murmurs of the bystanders as he stepped in front of Melissa and Linda, shielding them from further stares. The church usher, the same one who had just politely ushered Melissa out, hurried forward, guest list still in hand. "Mr. Whitaker, sir, it's just a mix-up with the guest list. She wasn't on it, and seating is limited, so—" The man, Mason Whitaker, raised a hand to stop him. "She's my guest," he said calmly, but with an authority that ended the conversation. "I'll take care of it. Thank you." The usher hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Whispers continued to ripple through the crowd, but Mason didn't acknowledge them. He turned to Melissa, his expression softening. "You don't have to leave in the rain like this. My car's nearby. Let me take you both somewhere dry." Melissa blinked, stunned. She didn't know this man, but his voice carried a kind of steady sincerity she couldn't bring herself to reject. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but we don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble at all," Mason replied, then crouched slightly to address Linda, offering a warm smile. "Hey there, kiddo. Do you like hot chocolate? There's a little cafe nearby that makes the best one in town." Linda, still sniffling, gave a shy nod, her eyes glimmering again. Melissa squeezed her hand and nodded too, still wary, still unsure. Mason led them to a black SUV parked discreetly near the edge of the lot. He opened the rear door for Linda and then the front for Melissa, polite without being showy. Once everyone was settled and the engine purred to life, the rain drummed gently on the windshield. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and cedar, comforting somehow against the chill of the morning. On the drive to the cafe, Mason kept his tone light and directed his attention mostly to Linda. "So," he asked with a grin, "what's your doll's name?" "Her name's Daisy," Linda said, voice growing more confident. "I made her dress all by myself." Mason looked impressed. Really, that's amazing. I bet Daisy loves hot chocolate just as much as you do. Linda giggled, the first real laugh since leaving the church. Melissa watched quietly, taking in the man beside her. He wasn't just polite, he had a way of putting Linda at ease, something few strangers could manage. But why was he helping them? She bit her lip, then spoke. Mr. Whitaker, right? I appreciate your kindness. But why did you help us? You don't know us. Mason glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes thoughtful. Call me Mason, he said. And why? I don't like watching people get humiliated, especially not in front of a child. He paused for a second, choosing his words. When I was a kid, I watched people treat my mother like she didn't belong. I've never forgotten how that felt. Melissa went quiet. His words touched something raw inside her. Years of being overlooked, whispered about, shut out. She thought of the supermarket glares, the whispered comments at school drop-off, the lonely feeling of trying to hold everything together. She nodded, voice soft. Thank you. Really. They arrived at a small cafe called Hazel's Brew, nestled in the center of town. The scent of cinnamon pastries and fresh coffee drifted out to meet them as they stepped inside. Linda let out a delighted squeal at the cozy wooden tables and steaming mugs lined up on the counter. Mason guided them to a window seat and ordered a hot chocolate for Linda, a coffee for Melissa, and a black coffee for himself. While Linda sipped and doodled on a napkin, Melissa turned to Mason. You were sitting in the front at the wedding, weren't you? A guest of the bride or groom? Mason shrugged, a faint, wistful smile on his lips. Wasn't really my place today, and I figured you and your daughter needed me more. He watched Linda with a gentle expression, then turned back to Melissa. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll still make that chocolate cake for her, like you said you would. Melissa laughed, the sound light and genuine. Deal, she said, something warm stirring in her chest for the first time in days. What she didn't know, what none of them did, was that this moment, this small act of kindness in the rain, would mark the beginning of something far greater. Something that would change all their lives. Rain poured down on Willow Creek like a gray curtain, turning the dirt road leading to the outskirts into a string of muddy puddles. Inside Mason Whitaker's SUV, Melissa Harper sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as her eyes drifted over the blurred outlines of oak trees through the rain-speckled window. In the back seat, Linda hugged her fabric doll, Daisy, eyes wide with wonder as she watched the countryside roll by, occasionally squealing when a rabbit darted across the path. The sound of rain tapping steadily on the roof merged with the gentle twang of an old country song playing on the radio, creating a strange sense of calm after the storm they had just left at St. Mary's Church. Mason drove carefully, glancing at Melissa in the rearview mirror. With rain like this, I didn't want you and Linda walking home, he said, his voice low but sincere. I've got a farm not far from here. You're welcome to wait out the storm there. It's more comfortable than a cafe booth. Melissa hesitated. She wasn't used to accepting help, especially not from a man she barely knew, even if he had just defended her in front of an entire church. But when she heard Linda yawn and saw her rub her eyes, she knew her daughter needed somewhere warm and dry. Thank you, she said softly but firmly. We won't stay long. Mason gave a small smile and focused back on the road. Minutes later, the SUV turned down a tree-lined lane and emerged at a hilltop farm nestled in a blanket of misty green. The main house was made of oak and stone, with deep red roof tiles and large windows that looked out onto open meadows. A small garden framed the home, filled with wildflowers and apple trees, charming and understated, not opulent, but deeply inviting. Melissa thought it didn't look like a millionaire's estate. It looked like a home with a soul. As the SUV pulled up to the front, an older woman stepped out from the doorway, holding an umbrella. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and she wore a forest green sweater and jeans. Her smile was kind, cutting through the dampness in the air. Mason, you're home early, she said, her gaze drifting to Melissa and Linda, with gentle curiosity. And this is... Ruth, this is Melissa and Linda, Mason replied as he opened the back door for Linda. They'll be staying a while. Rain delay. Can you set up the guest room? Of course, Ruth nodded and waved Linda over. Hi there, sweetheart. You like cookies? I just baked a batch. Linda, still shy but intrigued, nodded. Her eyes brightened at the mention of cookies. Melissa managed a grateful smile, the tension in her chest loosening slightly. Ruth ushered them inside. The living room was spacious and warm, with a stone fireplace and bookshelves brimming with old novels. The air smelled of pine wood and fresh-baked cookies. Linda, still clutching Daisy, ran to the wide window and exclaimed, "Mommy, look! There's a rainbow!" Melissa joined her at the window, her heart softening at the sight of the pale arc stretched across the stormy sky. She gently smoothed Linda's damp curls, grateful that her daughter was smiling again. While Ruth prepared the guest room, Mason poured a cup of hot tea and handed it to Melissa. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice careful, as if afraid of overstepping. "I'm fine," Melissa replied, wrapping her hands around the cup. "Today just didn't go the way I hoped. I only wanted Linda to have a nice day." She glanced toward her daughter, who was now peering out into the garden. "This place, do you live here alone? It's beautiful." Mason nodded, a trace of melancholy in his eyes. "Mostly alone. Ruth's been here since I was a kid. The farm's been in my family forever, but I restored it after—" He trailed off, fingers tapping lightly against his coffee cup. "After an accident, a few years ago, someone I loved passed away." Melissa blinked, surprised by the openness. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been hard." Mason shrugged, the smile on his lips failing to mask the sadness behind his eyes. "I got used to it, or at least I've tried to." He changed the subject, voice softening. "I fund some community projects around Willow Creek. After-school programs, small grants. I stay out of the spotlight, though. Maybe that's what you and I had in common today. Not belonging in that church." Melissa chuckled lightly for the first time in hours. "Maybe, but you've done so much. I'm just trying to raise Linda, one day at a time." She looked out at her daughter, who was chasing butterflies across the garden despite the light drizzle. "Don't say that like it's small," Mason replied. "Raising someone like her, it's no small thing. You're doing better than you think." He stood and nodded toward the door. "Want to go outside with her? The garden's prettiest in the rain." Melissa nodded, and together Mason, Melissa, and Linda stepped into the garden under the dripping apple trees. Linda delighted in picking wildflowers, chatting about Daisy and how she wanted to be an artist someday. Mason listened closely, asking questions that made her giggle. Melissa watched, realizing he wasn't just kind. He made people feel seen, even while carrying pain of his own. As dusk settled over the hills, Ruth called everyone in for dinner: pumpkin soup, warm bread, and apple cookies. Linda, tired after a long day, nearly fell asleep at the table. Ruth guided her upstairs to a cozy guest room where a folding bed had been prepared with lavender-scented sheets. Linda hugged Melissa tightly and murmured, "Mommy, this place feels like Grandma's house." Then she drifted off, peaceful in a way Melissa rarely saw in their cramped apartment. Melissa stayed beside her for a while, brushing hair from her forehead. Her heart ached and eased at the same time. When she returned to the living room, she found Mason standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "She asleep?" he asked, not turning around. "Like a rock," Melissa replied. "Thank you, Mason. Not just for today, for everything. Linda doesn't get this kind of peace very often." Mason nodded, still watching the fire. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what felt right." He glanced at her briefly, offering a small smile. "Get some rest. The rain should stop by morning. I'll drive you both home." Melissa nodded and turned toward the guest room. But even as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this farm, and the man by the fire, had just opened a door to something she never dared hope for. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the window of Mason Whitaker's small library, casting golden stripes across the gleaming hardwood floor. The space wasn't large, but every inch of it glowed with the warmth of time. Shelves lined with well-worn books, a fabric armchair faded with age beside the stone fireplace, and a scattering of quiet relics on the wooden desk. A pocket watch, a dusty photo frame, and a tin box filled with sharpened pencils. Melissa Harper stood in the center of the room, a cloth in hand, momentarily caught in the scent of old paper and pine. She had agreed to help Ruth with the morning cleaning, partly to show her gratitude and partly to distract herself from the sting of the previous day at St. Mary's. Ruth, her silver hair neatly tied back and arms full of fresh towels, stepped into the room with her usual gentle smile. "You don't have to do too much, dear," she said as she placed the towels on the desk. "Just dust the shelves and maybe straighten a few books. No one really comes in here anymore. Not since—" She paused, her voice trailing off into memory. "Well, take your time." Melissa nodded, respecting the pause, but sensing that Ruth had just stepped around something delicate. She began carefully wiping down the shelves, cautious not to disturb the old novels or architectural volumes Mason clearly cherished. On a small rug near the window, Linda sat cross-legged, humming a song as she drew with colored pencils Ruth had found for her. "Mommy, can I draw a picture for Mr. Mason?" she asked, her wide eyes gleaming. "Of course, sweetheart," Melissa smiled, brushing her daughter's hair from her forehead. "I think he'd love that." It warmed her to see Linda so carefree, untouched by yesterday's cruel whispers at the church. This house, this land, it was offering her daughter something rare and precious: peace. As Melissa worked her way to the lower shelves, her cloth brushed against a slim, leather-bound notebook wedged between two large hardcovers. Curious, she pulled it free. The leather was cracked and soft, bound shut with a faded blue ribbon. When she untied it, a rush of time seemed to exhale from the yellowed pages. The first page read, "Sarah, 2020. Melissa froze. Sarah, the name Mason had spoken the night before, his late fiancée. She knew she shouldn't read further, but something in her, something both respectful and deeply human, compelled her to turn the page. "Today Mason took me to Shenandoah Valley. He said he wanted to build us a little house there, with a garden full of wildflowers. I dreamed of a family, a child, maybe a little girl with his laugh. Is it foolish to dream of things that may never come true?" Melissa's breath caught. The words were tender and aching, a mirror of her own past hopes, dreams she had held before her life unraveled, before her daughter became her whole world. She had dreamed of a home too once, a family, peace. She gently closed the journal, fingers trembling. Behind her, footsteps creaked softly on the floor. Melissa turned to find Ruth standing in the doorway, her expression kind but knowing. "You found Sarah's journal," Ruth said quietly. Melissa's face flushed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right," Ruth said, stepping into the room and settling into the old armchair. "Maybe it was meant to be read, at least by someone who might understand." She let out a sigh, her eyes drifting toward the window. Sarah was Mason's light. They met in architecture school. Fell in love fast and real. 4 years ago, she died in a car accident. Mason was with her until the end, but he never forgave himself. He always believed if he had been the one driving that day, it might have been different. Melissa sat on the edge of the hearth, clutching the journal to her chest. "That's why he lives out here? Alone?" she asked, her voice low. Ruth nodded. "He left the company, came back here, started funding local projects, quietly without ever attaching his name. I think he was trying to give something back, trying to prove he wasn't useless. But his heart, he closed it off." Melissa looked at the worn leather cover in her hands, and for the first time, she saw Mason clearly, not as a wealthy benefactor or mysterious stranger, but as a man carrying deep scars. His kindness at the church, his steady presence at the cafe, these weren't passing gestures. They were threads of a man rebuilding something broken. "Mr. Mason, look!" Linda's voice cut through the moment. She scampered across the rug, waving a colorful drawing. Mason had just entered the room. "I made this for you," she said brightly, holding up her picture. It was a crayon sketch of a hilltop house with 3 people in front: a tall man, a woman with brown hair, and a little girl holding a doll. "That's you, Mommy, and me," Linda beamed. Mason blinked, momentarily stunned, then knelt to her level. "You drew this?" he asked, voice softer than Melissa had ever heard it. Linda nodded, hugging the paper. "Do you like it?" I love it, he said, his smile real, deep and warm. Can I keep it? Linda nodded again and threw her arms around his neck. Mason held her, gently, a quiet look of wonder on his face. Melissa watched from where she sat. Her heart stirred. Something invisible shifted in the room, a thread, maybe, forming between the man who had lost a future and the child who had never known a father. She rose slowly and walked over to the shelf. Carefully, she returned Sarah's journal to its place, letting it rest undisturbed. She had seen enough. Enough to understand that Mason's wounds were real, that his silence wasn't distance, it was pain, and his kindness, so freely given, came from a place of loss. Maybe, just maybe, she and Linda hadn't stumbled into this farm by accident. Maybe this place, this man, held the beginnings of something they hadn't dared to believe in again. Healing. Summer sunlight flooded Mason Whitaker's farm garden, gilding the rows of wildflowers and the dewy apple tree leaves. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and warm earth, bringing life to the lush green hillside on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Melissa Harper stood in the garden, holding a small pair of pruning shears, trimming back the overgrown rose bushes. Her cotton shirt fluttered in the wind, and for the first time in many months, she felt a quiet peace creeping into her heart. Just a few steps away, Linda was chasing a butterfly, her clear laughter echoing like a melody. It had been 2 weeks since Melissa and her daughter arrived at the farm after the rain and the incident at St. Mary's Church. What began as a temporary shelter had become a part of their life. With quiet sincerity, Mason had offered for them to stay until Melissa found a more stable job. She had agreed, not just because their cramped apartment was no place she wanted Linda to grow up, but because this farm, with its garden and warm meals, seemed to be healing wounds she hadn't even realized she carried. That morning, Melissa helped Mrs. Ruth tend the garden, a simple task, but one that made her feel useful. She weeded, watered the plants, and chatted with Mrs. Ruth about everyday things, weather, apple jam recipes, or how Linda loved to draw everything she saw. Meanwhile, Linda sat under an apple tree with her notebook and crayons, humming as she sketched. Melissa watched her daughter, her heart heavy with love. Linda laughed more, slept better, and her eyes lit up every time she talked about the farm. The sound of footsteps on grass made Melissa look up. Mason stepped out of the house, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, carrying a tray of lemonade. He set the tray on the wooden table in the garden and smiled at Linda. "Sweetheart, want to try playing the piano? I've got an old song I think you'll like." Linda dropped her notebook and squealed, "Yes!" She ran after Mason into the living room, where an old wooden piano stood by the large window. Melissa followed, curious. In the living room, sunlight filtered through the linen curtains, illuminating the time-worn piano keys. Mason sat down, letting his fingers glide over the keys, playing a slow, gentle tune, like a lullaby. "I wrote this back when I was young," he said, eyes on Linda. "Want to try?" Linda nodded, climbed onto the bench, and Mason patiently showed her how to place her hands, how to press each note. Linda's clumsy notes blended with their laughter, creating a moment Melissa couldn't look away from. She sat on the sofa and listened. Mason's music, though simple, carried a deep sadness, as if he was weaving memories of Sarah into each note. Melissa thought of the journal she found in the library, the lines about Sarah's dreams of family. She looked at Mason, a man who always appeared calm, but whose eyes, when he taught Linda, revealed a tenderness she'd never seen before. That afternoon, the three of them had lunch in the garden. Mrs. Ruth's homemade sandwiches, fresh garden salad, and chilled lemonade. Linda told Mason about her doll, Daisy, saying it wanted to be an artist like her. Mason listened, teasing her now and then, making Linda giggle. Melissa watched, realizing the bond between the three of them was quietly growing in these ordinary moments. Having breakfast together, reading books to Linda, or simply sitting in the sunlight, listening to a child's story. After lunch, as Linda ran off to pick wildflowers, Mason turned to Melissa, his voice low. "Have you ever thought about teaching?" he asked. "I fund a community center in town. They offer literacy classes for underprivileged kids. They need someone like you, patient, good with children." Melissa blinked, surprised. I've never taught formally. I just teach Linda at home, And I dropped out of college because she trailed off, not wanting to bring up the husband who had left her. I mean, I'm not sure I'm good enough. Good enough, Mason repeated, his gaze sincere. I've seen the way you teach Linda. You have a gift, Melissa, and the center needs people like you. Just a few hours a week if you want to give it a try. Melissa was silent, weighing the idea. The thought of doing something meaningful, of feeling valuable, made her heart race. She nodded and smiled. All right, I'll try. Thank you, Mason. He nodded, though his eyes drifted off into the distance. Don't thank me. I just wanted to help. He stood and walked into the house, leaving Melissa with the feeling that he was holding back something invisible. She didn't know that, in Mason's heart, every moment with her and Linda was a quiet battle. He loved the way Linda laughed, the way Melissa cared for her, but he feared that if he allowed himself to get closer, he might lose the memory of Sarah, the woman he once promised to love forever. That evening, Melissa sat beside Linda in bed, reading a fairy tale. Linda yawned and whispered, "Mommy, Mr. Mason is nice, isn't he? He reminds me of Grandpa." Melissa smiled, brushing her daughter's hair. "Yes, he's very kind. Now go to sleep, sweetheart." But as Linda drifted off, Melissa looked out the window, where the moonlight shone over the garden. She thought of Mason, of the community center, and of herself, a single mother who once thought she had nothing left but Linda. At this farm, she was starting to believe she could do more, and for the first time, she dared to hope for the days ahead. The Willow Creek Community Center, a modest red brick building nestled in the heart of the town square, buzzed with children's laughter on Saturday morning. Summer sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up chalkboards covered with letters and numbers. Melissa Harper stood at the front of a small group of elementary students, pointing at the board, her voice gentle but steady. "Okay, who can read this word? Sunshine." A shy girl raised her hand and read it out loud. Melissa smiled and clapped encouragingly. "Great job, Emma." The literacy class, funded by Mason Whitaker, had become an unexpected joy for Melissa over the past 3 weeks. The children, many from underprivileged families, adored her for her patience and the stories she told during breaks. Some parents, once hesitant, had started bringing her cookies or coffee to show appreciation. Melissa felt that a part of herself, buried after years of being a single mother, was coming alive again. She was starting to believe she could do something meaningful, not just for Linda, but for all of Willow Creek. But not everyone in town looked at her with warmth. After class, Melissa took Linda to Hazel's Brew for a hot chocolate. The small cafe was packed, the air rich with the scent of cinnamon waffles and coffee. Linda sat at a corner table, doodling, while Melissa stood in line. At the counter, she overheard 2 women talking nearby, their voices just loud enough that she couldn't pretend not to hear. "That's her, the one staying at Mason Whitaker's farm." One woman, wearing a silk scarf, whispered to her friend, "Used to be a waitress at that cafe. Single mom. Now she's climbing up thanks to Mason. Who would have guessed?" The other woman chuckled, her eyes drifting toward Melissa. "Does she really think she belongs with someone like him? Mason's a millionaire, and she didn't even finish college. I heard her husband left because she wasn't good enough." Melissa felt the blood rush to her face, as if she'd been slapped. She lowered her gaze, pretending to study the menu, but the words stung like knives. She knew this town, where people smiled to your face and whispered behind your back. She had once been shunned for being a single mom, the judging stares at the grocery store, the church invitations that never came. But she had hoped that the class, Mason's kindness, meant things could be different. Now she realized she had been naive. On the ride back to the farm, Linda held her mother's hand, chattering happily about a drawing she'd made. Melissa only nodded, her mind spinning. The whispers had reopened wounds she tried to bury. She was a failed single mother, abandoned by her husband, not good enough for someone like Mason. She looked at Linda, carefree and glowing with joy, and wondered if staying at the farm had been a mistake, not just for her, but for Linda too, who would grow up hearing those whispers. That night in the warm guest room Ruth had prepared, Melissa sat at the desk and wrote a letter. Her hand trembled on the paper, but she forced herself to stay firm. "Mason, Ruth, I don't know how to thank you both for your kindness. This farm has given Linda and me the most peaceful days we've had in years. But I can't stay. I need to stand on my own feet. For Linda and for myself. Thank you for everything, Melissa. She folded the letter and left it on the table, then quietly packed a few clothes into a bag. Linda, already fast asleep, stirred slightly as Melissa lifted her into the taxi she had called earlier. But as they stepped into the yard, the porch light flicked on, and Mason appeared in the doorway, a jacket hastily thrown over his shoulders. Melissa, what's going on? He asked, concern etched in his voice. He looked at Linda, rubbing her eyes in her mother's arms, then at the bag. Where are you going in the middle of the night? Melissa clutched Linda tighter, her voice shaking but firm. We have to go, Mason. Thank you for everything, but I don't belong here. She turned away, not wanting him to see her teary eyes. Linda, still drowsy, suddenly broke free from her mother's arms and ran to Mason, wrapping her arms around his leg. Uncle Mason, don't let us go, she cried, her voice cracking. I want you to stay with us forever. Her words hit Melissa like a blade. She froze, then knelt and pulled her daughter close, unable to hold back the tears. Mason knelt beside Linda, stroking her hair, his voice rough with emotion. I want that too, sweetheart, but your mom has made up her mind. He looked up at Melissa, pain flickering in his eyes. If this is what you want, I won't stop you, but at least let me drive you. Don't take a taxi this late. Melissa nodded silently, too drained to argue. In the car, no one spoke. Only Linda sniffled quietly. When they reached the old apartment complex on the edge of town, Mason helped carry the bag but stopped at the door. Melissa, he said, his voice hoarse, I don't know what I did wrong, but if I made you feel disrespected, I'm sorry. Melissa shook her head, tears falling freely. It's not you, Mason, it's me. I can't live with the whispers. She turned away and shut the door, leaving Mason alone in the dark. Back at the quiet farm, Mason returned and found the letter on the table. He read it slowly, his hand tightening around the paper. Ruth stood in the doorway, sighing. You're really letting her go, Mason? That woman and her little girl. They're the best thing that's ever happened to you. Mason didn't respond, but inside him a storm was raging. He realized he'd never said it out loud. Not pity, but the growing admiration and affection he had for Melissa and Linda. He had kept his distance, afraid of losing the memory of Sarah. But now, without Linda's laughter echoing through the house, he knew he couldn't let fear rob him of happiness again. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. Mason Whitaker's farm, once filled with Linda's laughter and Melissa's everyday stories, now sank into a heavy silence. Pale moonlight streamed through the living room window, casting a glow over the worn piano keys where Linda had once practiced clumsy notes. Mason sat in the armchair, holding the letter Melissa had left behind, reading the neat lines over and over. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, for Linda and for myself. Each word felt like a blade, reminding him of that moment he stood frozen at the rundown apartment complex, watching the mother and daughter disappear behind a cracked wooden door. Ruth entered carrying a tray of tea, her sharp eyes clouded with worry. She set the tray down without a word, looking at Mason with silent reproach. At last she spoke, her voice low but firm. You really let them go, Mason? Melissa and Linda were the best thing to happen to this farm. To you. Why do you keep letting your fear stop you from being happy? Mason clenched the letter tighter, not looking up. You don't understand, Ruth, he said hoarsely. I lost Sarah. I don't want to lose anyone else. If I let myself get close and something happens, what then? Ruth sat across from him, her gaze softening but uncompromising. You didn't lose them to fate or some tragic accident, Mason. You lost them because you didn't say what you felt. Melissa didn't leave because she didn't need you. She left because she thought she didn't belong here, and you did nothing to show her otherwise. Her words hit like a blow, and Mason sat stunned. He thought of the days on the farm, Linda singing in the garden, the way Melissa smiled while teaching her daughter, the light in her eyes when she spoke about the literacy class. He had kept his distance, thinking it was the way to protect Sarah's memory. But now he saw he had pushed Melissa and Linda away, left them alone to face the town's cruel whispers. The next morning, Mason drove to the apartment complex on the edge of Willow Creek. A row of low, peeling buildings with small yards overgrown with weeds. The sky was bright, but the air here felt heavy, burdened with the struggles of its residents. He parked outside Melissa's unit, heart pounding. Through the window, he saw Linda at the table drawing, while Melissa, dressed in a waitress uniform, tied her hair back before heading to work. He knocked on the door. When Melissa opened it, her eyes flickered with surprise before settling into guarded calm. "Mason," she said, voice even but cool. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, Linda looked up, her eyes lighting up. "Uncle Mason!" she cried, leaping from her seat and wrapping her arms around his legs, hugging him tightly like she was afraid he might vanish. "Uncle Mason, I missed you. You came to take us back to the farm, right?" Mason knelt, holding Linda close, his heart aching. "I missed you too, sweetheart," he said, brushing her hair. He looked at Melissa, her expression still distant, though her hands trembled slightly as she held Linda's shoulders. "Linda, go inside, honey," Melissa said gently but firmly. Linda hesitated, then ran in, leaving the adults in the soft morning light. Melissa folded her arms. "If you're here to convince me, don't bother. I've made up my mind. I need to make it on my own." Mason took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Melissa, I didn't come to convince you. I came to apologize." He stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "I didn't help you and Linda out of pity. You gave me a reason to live again, to feel like that farm was more than just a place I was hiding in. But I never made that clear. I let you think you didn't matter. That was my failure." Melissa blinked, surprised by his honesty. She turned away, glancing through the window at Linda drawing again. "You don't understand," she said, voice shaky. "This town, they said I was reaching above my place, that I wasn't good enough for you. I can't raise Linda in that. I grew up with those whispers. I won't let her do the same. I have to prove I'm good enough, not just to them, but to myself." Mason nodded, his eyes pained but resolute. "I understand, but you don't need to leave to prove that. You already have, with your class, with the way you raise Linda. You're stronger than you know, Melissa. And if you're willing, I want you to come back to the farm. Not as a guest, but as the leader of a new community project I'm launching. A class for women like you, women who need a second chance." Melissa was quiet, considering. She thought of the days at the farm, Linda's laughter, the way Mason looked when he taught her piano. She thought of this cramped apartment, the aching hands from night shifts at the diner, just to cover rent. The idea of doing something bigger, for herself, for others, made her heart beat faster. "All right," she said finally, her voice soft but sure. "But not because I need your help, Mason, because I want to do this, for Linda, and for other women like me." Mason smiled for the first time that day, a look of quiet relief. "I respect that," he said, "and I promise, I'll never let you feel like you don't belong again." From inside, Linda had been eavesdropping. She came running out and hugged them both. "Mommy, Uncle Mason, we're going back to the farm, right?" she beamed. Melissa laughed, eyes glistening. "Yes, baby, we're going back." On the drive home, Linda sang in the back seat, while Mason and Melissa sat in silence. Not the silence of strangers, but of understanding. Mason looked at the road ahead, knowing he still had fears to conquer, but this time he wouldn't let them hold him back. The farm, with its garden and Linda's laughter, would be full of life again. And for the first time, he dared to hope for a future that wasn't just a memory. The Willow Creek Community Center was buzzing with chatter and the scent of freshly baked cookies on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Brightly colored boards displayed slogans like, "Learn to shine," and "Grow together." Melissa Harper stood in the center of the large room, wearing a pale blue shirt and jeans, guiding a group of women, single mothers, women who had lost their jobs, or simply those looking for a fresh start. She pointed to the whiteboard, her voice warm but confident. "Today we'll write a short paragraph about your dreams. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. The class for single mothers, sponsored by Mason Whitaker and funded in part by St. Mary's Church, had become the heart of the town over the past 2 months. Melissa, with the help of Mrs. Helen, a retired black elementary school teacher with more than 3 decades of experience, had turned the class into a safe space where students didn't just learn literacy skills but also shared their personal stories. Mrs. Helen, with her salt and pepper hair and radiant smile, sat in a corner helping a student complete her assignment. Her voice rang out like a song. "You're doing great, Mary. Now let's try one more sentence, shall we?" Melissa looked around, her heart full of satisfaction. She remembered the days in that rundown apartment when she thought she had nothing but Linda. Now she stood here, leading a program that wasn't just changing the lives of these women, it was helping her rediscover herself. Near the window, Linda was drawing with a few other children, occasionally glancing up to smile at her mother. Melissa smiled back, knowing she was building a better future for her daughter. After class, Melissa and Mrs. Helen stayed behind to tidy up and discuss plans to expand the program in the fall. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," Mrs. Helen said, her eyes sparkling. "You're not afraid of hard things and you put your heart into everything you do. This town is lucky to have you." Melissa blushed and shook her head. "No, I'm the lucky one, for having you here." The next day, Mason arrived at the center wearing a gray t-shirt and carrying a folder. "I want to take you to the church," he said, his voice calm but enthusiastic. "The board wants to hear about the project. I think we can propose an expansion, more classes, maybe even a support fund for women learning new trades." Melissa blinked, surprised by the scale of the idea, but nodded, confidence growing inside her. At St. Mary's Church, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting dappled patterns over the wooden pews. Father Michael, a tall, lean man with silver hair, welcomed them into his modest office. Sitting beside him were 2 board members, and, to Melissa's surprise, Mrs. Catherine Thompson, the mother of the bride from the wedding where Melissa had once been, politely asked to leave. Her heart raced, but she kept her posture upright and held the folder Mason had handed her firmly. Mason began, his voice clear. "Melissa's program has helped over 20 women in town, and we believe it can do even more. With the church's support, we'd like to expand the classes and create a scholarship fund." He looked at Melissa, giving her the floor. Melissa took a deep breath and outlined the plan: writing classes, financial literacy, emotional support, all aimed at helping women become more independent. She spoke of the students: Mary, who had just landed a part-time job after learning how to write a resume, and Laura, who had rediscovered hope after years of abuse. Her voice wavered at first but grew steadier with each word, as if all the fear of judgment had melted away. Father Michael nodded thoughtfully. When Melissa finished, he smiled warmly. "Ms. Harper, I must admit, this church didn't treat you fairly in the past. For that, I'm sorry. But what you've done proves that you're an essential part of Willow Creek. The church will support your project." Mrs. Catherine, who had remained silent throughout, gave a small nod. Her gaze no longer carried the coldness it once did. Melissa left the church feeling relieved, and still a little stunned. Mason walked beside her, smiling. "You did great," he said. "They didn't just say yes, they want you to lead the whole program." Melissa laughed and shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. You, Mrs. Helen, Father Michael, you all helped." That weekend, the community center held a small celebration to mark the expansion of the project. A long table covered in a white cloth was lined with pastries and fruit juice. Kids ran through the courtyard, and Melissa's students proudly displayed their writing. Linda, wearing a new floral dress, held up a small sign that read, "Welcome everyone," drawing laughter and applause from the crowd. In the middle of the event, Melissa was surprised to see Mrs. Catherine Thompson approaching, holding a hardcover children's book, a story about butterflies. She handed it to Linda, her voice soft. "I heard you like drawing butterflies, Linda. I thought you might enjoy this." Linda squealed in delight, hugged the book, then wrapped her arms around Mrs. Catherine, making the woman flush with surprise, but smile nonetheless. Melissa stood nearby, stunned. Mrs. Catherine hadn't apologized aloud, but in Willow Creek's quiet, traditional culture, This small gesture was its own kind of confession. As the event drew to a close, Melissa stood outside, watching people talk and laugh. Mrs. Helen patted her on the shoulder and said, "You've done something this town really needed, Melissa. You brought people closer together." Melissa smiled, watching Linda run with her friends, then glanced over at Mason, who was helping fold up tables. She was no longer the woman on the last pew of St. Mary's. She was Melissa Harper, the woman who had found her voice, and through it, helped her community rediscover its heart. The summer sunset cast a golden-orange glow over Mason Whitaker's garden, bathing the wildflowers in dew-speckled apple leaves in warm light. A soft breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses, creating a peaceful, almost storybook atmosphere. Melissa Harper sat on a wooden bench in the garden, holding a warm cup of tea, her eyes drifting to Linda, who was laughing as she chased a butterfly through the flower beds. The farm, with its sunlit days and birdsong, had become a second home to mother and daughter, a place where old wounds were slowly healing. Mason emerged from the house holding a folder of sheet music. He wore a simple white linen shirt, his dark hair slightly tousled by the breeze. He paused, watching Linda with a quiet smile, then walked over and sat beside Melissa. "That girl never runs out of energy," he said, his deep voice warm, his gaze still following Linda. Melissa chuckled, setting her tea down. "Sometimes I wish I had half her energy. She loves this place, Mason. She calls it her butterfly kingdom." She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and something newer, something harder to name. Over the past weeks, through community classes, shared meals, and the way Mason patiently played piano with Linda, she had come to see him not just as the man who helped her at the church, but as someone she wanted to truly understand. Mason handed her the folder, his fingers brushing lightly across the cover. "I wrote this for Linda," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "It's a short piece, inspired by the little tune she's always humming. I guess you and Linda helped me believe in love again." He looked at her, his deep blue eyes filled with sincerity and a trace of fear, as if he worried he'd said too much. Melissa took the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the title, Linda's Lullaby. The handwritten notes were soft, like a lullaby, and made her heart beat faster. She thought of Sarah's journal, of dreams about family, and realized that Mason, who had locked his heart away after such a loss, was now opening it to her and Linda. "Mason, this is beautiful," she said softly. "Linda's going to love it, and I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," Mason replied, his gaze gentle. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You and Linda brought light back into this place, into my life. After Sarah, I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. But you make me want to try." Melissa was quiet. His words touched something deep inside her. She looked out over the garden, where Linda was gathering wildflower petals, then took a deep breath and finally shared something she'd always kept hidden. "I used to think I didn't deserve love," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "When Linda was just a year old, her father left. He said I wasn't good enough, that I was holding him back. And I believed it, Mason. I worked day and night to raise Linda. But I always felt like I wasn't enough. When people in town started whispering, it reminded me of his words, and I got scared. Scared that Linda would grow up with a mother who wasn't strong enough." Mason listened without interrupting, his eyes full of understanding. When she paused, he gently took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Melissa, you are not lacking," he said, his voice firm. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. The way you've raised Linda, the way you stood tall at the community center, that's not something just anyone can do. You deserve every good thing, and I want to be part of that, if you'll let me." Melissa blinked, tears glimmering in her eyes, but she smiled. She gave his hand a small squeeze, the fear that had once held her back slowly melting away. "I want that too," she whispered. "But I'm scared, Mason. Scared I won't be enough, or that this won't last." "We're all scared," Mason said, pulling her gently into a hug. "But I'd rather be scared and try than let you and Linda walk away again." They embraced in the fading sunlight, the breeze mingling with the soft piano melody Mason had played earlier, still echoing from the living room. From across the yard, Linda ran over holding a new drawing, unaware of the moment unfolding. She held it up excitedly. "Mom, Mr. Mason, look, I drew our family." The picture showed three figures in front of the farmhouse, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl holding a doll, surrounded by colorful butterflies. "I want you and Mr. Mason to get married so we can stay here forever," she declared. Melissa laughed, blushing, while Mason pretended to cough, his smile radiant. "Well, young lady, you sure know how to make things interesting," he said, lifting Linda into his arms as she giggled. "But I think your mom needs a little more time to decide on such a big thing." He glanced at Melissa, his look teasing but warm. Melissa brushed Linda's hair back and hugged her close. "Linda, no matter what, Mr. Mason and I will always be here for you," she said gently. Linda nodded, content, and ran off to play again, leaving the two adults standing together in the golden light. They sat back down on the bench, shoulder to shoulder, no words needed. The sound of the piano, now played softly by Mrs. Ruth, floated through the window like a gentle reminder of the days they had shared on the farm. Melissa looked at Mason and, for the first time in years, felt true peace. She was no longer the insecure single mother, and Mason was no longer the man hiding from the past. They were building something new, not to replace what had been lost, but to cherish what they now had. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky full of stars, Mason took Melissa's hand and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a chance." Melissa smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for giving me a home." St. Mary's Church in Willow Creek, Virginia, basked in the warm glow of June sunlight that morning. Rays filtered through stained glass windows, casting patches of green, red, and gold across the stone aisle. Simple white wildflowers, picked from Mason Whitaker's own garden, were tied around the wooden pews, creating an atmosphere both rustic and elegant. There was none of the extravagance of the mayor's daughter's wedding the year before, but today felt warmer, more genuine, as if the entire town had gathered to bless a new beginning. It was the wedding day of Melissa Harper and Mason Whitaker, a day Willow Creek would long remember. Melissa stood in a small room behind the church, wearing a simple white wedding dress. Delicate lace sleeves wrapped around her shoulders, and the hem of her gown brushed the wooden floor. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her brown hair loosely tied back with sprigs of wildflowers tucked in. She smiled, not the nervous smile of a bride seeking perfection, but the calm smile of a woman who had found peace after a long storm. Linda, in a soft pink floral dress, stood beside her, holding a basket of fresh petals, bouncing on her toes. "Mommy, you look like a princess," she squealed, her wide eyes sparkling. Melissa knelt and hugged her tightly, brushing back her messy curls. "Thank you, my sweet girl," she whispered, tears shimmering in her eyes. "And today you're the most beautiful little flower girl." Linda giggled, gave her mother a tight squeeze, and dashed toward the door, eager to begin the ceremony. Outside, the church was filled, not with lavish VIPs, but with familiar faces from Willow Creek. Mrs. Helen, the retired African-American schoolteacher who had supported Melissa's work at the community center, sat in the front row wearing a violet dress, her smile radiant. Melissa's students, Mary, Laura, and many other women, chatted quietly, proud of the woman who had helped them reclaim their voices. Even Mrs. Catherine Thompson, once cold and dismissive when Melissa was asked to leave a wedding, was there, wearing a pale blue silk dress, her expression softer than ever. The organ began to play a gentle, slow melody, Linda's lullaby, written by Mason himself and performed by a friend. Linda entered first, scattering white rose petals down the aisle, each step a playful dance. The guest chuckled when she paused to wave at Mrs. Helen, making the whole church light up with joy. Melissa, arm in arm with Ruth, who had become like a mother to her, followed, her heart racing not with fear, but with joy. Mason stood at the altar in a dark gray suit, his black hair neatly combed, his eyes lighting up as he watched Melissa approach. He didn't hide his smile, an honest, heartfelt smile, as if every sorrow in his past had melted away in this moment. When she reached him, he took her hand and whispered, "You're more beautiful than I ever dreamed." Melissa blushed, gripping his hand gently, feeling as if the entire world had disappeared except for the two of them. Father Michael stepped up to the pulpit, his voice warm and steady in the quiet sanctuary. "Today we witness a family built on trust and forgiveness," he began. "Melissa and Mason have overcome trials, not just to find one another, but to bring us, the Willow Creek community, closer together. Today we bless not only their love, but the power of grace and hope." Many guests wiped away tears. Mrs. Catherine bowed her head, her hand clutching a handkerchief, perhaps remembering her past mistakes. Mrs. Helen nodded proudly at Melissa, her eyes glowing. Linda, standing beside her mother, looked around wide-eyed, not grasping every word but sensing the joy in the air. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Mason and Melissa exchanged vows, their voices shaky yet sure. "I promise to love and cherish you, Melissa, and Linda as my family through sunshine and storms," Mason said, never breaking eye contact. Melissa replied, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I promise to stand beside you, Mason, and build a home full of love, for us and for Linda." They exchanged silver rings etched with tiny wildflowers, symbols of the garden that had brought them together. When Father Michael declared them husband and wife, Mason gently kissed Melissa, a soft but deeply emotional kiss. Linda clapped and jumped up and down, making the whole church laugh. Guests applauded as the couple walked back down the aisle, wildflowers tossed in the air by the children from Melissa's class, creating a dazzling scene in the sunlight. The reception took place at the farm, in their beloved garden. Long wooden tables draped with white linen held homemade pastries, apple preserves, and cold lemonade. Children ran and played while adults mingled, the music of a local country band filling the warm air. Mrs. Helen led a group of students in presenting Melissa with a notebook filled with letters of thanks. "You changed our lives," Mary said, hugging Melissa. "Today is your day, but it's ours too." Even Mrs. Catherine, still composed but more open, approached Melissa. "You've done something wonderful for this town, Melissa," she said sincerely. "I'm grateful to be here today." Melissa smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That means a lot." There was no formal apology, but in Willow Creek, presence and words like these were enough to heal old wounds. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Melissa led Mason to a small corner of the garden she had tended herself. A bed of daisies, lavender, and wild roses surrounded a wooden plaque that read, "Sarah's Garden." "I wanted to do this," Melissa said softly, "to honor Sarah. She was an important part of your life. I hope it's okay." Mason stared at the plaque, eyes glistening. He pulled Melissa into his arms and whispered, "You're not replacing anyone, Melissa. You and Linda are the miracle I never dared to dream of. Thank you for making me a better man." They stood together, holding each other, as the breeze whispered through the garden, carrying blessings from the past and hope for the future. The final scene, Linda ran through the garden, holding a butterfly-shaped kite Mason had made for her. Her laughter echoed, mingling with the soft music from the band. Melissa and Mason stood side by side, hands entwined, watching her. "We did it, didn't we?" Melissa asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Mason kissed her forehead, smiling. "Yes, we did. And this is only the beginning." They looked out toward the horizon, where the last golden rays of sunlight still shimmered, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together as a real family. Lucian Thorne stepped out of his Rolls-Royce Phantom, the polished leather of his shoes tapping against the stone-paved street of the Lower East Side's Art District. The late autumn evening air was crisp, laced with the scent of spray paint and the faint rhythm of lo-fi music echoing from a nearby corner. He adjusted the collar of his bespoke suit jacket, his eyes scanning the crowd. Street artists, hipsters with dyed green hair, and curious wanderers like himself who didn't quite belong here. Lucian wasn't part of this world. He was here looking for inspiration, or more accurately, to ensure his next luxury complex didn't get branded soulless like his last few projects had been. A graffiti mural on an old brick wall caught his eye. The strokes were wild and unrestrained, the colors exploding like raw emotion. But underneath it all was something aching. He tilted his head, trying to analyze it. Not bad, he murmured, his voice low and sharp like the way he signed off on multi-million-dollar deals. Not bad, a biting voice cut in from behind. That's the worst compliment I've ever heard, Mr. Fancy Suit. Lucian turned, brow slightly raised. Standing in front of him was a girl, or rather a storm in human form. Wren Callahan, though he didn't yet know her name, stood there with messy brown hair tied high, a paint-streaked oversized hoodie, and scuffed combat boots. One hand held a spray can, the other resting on her hip, her eyes gleaming with defiance. She looked like she just stepped out of the wall itself, vivid, untamed, and impossible to ignore. Mr. Fancy Suit? Lucian repeated, voice cold as ice. How old are you to be calling me that? Old enough to know your suit costs more than an apartment in this neighborhood, she shot back with a smirk, and young enough to call you Mr. Fancy Suit if you act like a soulless machine. Lucian stiffened. No one talked to him like that. He was Lucian Thorne, the man behind glass towers scraping the sky, the man whose snap of a finger could silence an entire boardroom. But this girl, with her sharp brown eyes and half-smile, seemed not to care in the slightest who he was. You painted this? He asked, gesturing to the graffiti. Sure did. And if you're planning to buy it to hang in some glossy office, sorry, it's not for sale. Wren crossed her arms, scanning him from head to toe. People like you wouldn't understand it anyway. Lucian let out a dry chuckle, an unusual sound even for him. People like me? You don't know anything about me. Oh, let me guess. Wren leaned in, her tone teasing. You're the type who thinks everything has a price, right? Land, homes, art, hell, even people. You walk in here, look at us like we're street rats, and think you can buy the soul of this place to build something shiny and soulless. Lucian frowned, not in anger, but in astonishment. She was disturbingly accurate. He was, in fact, planning to turn this neighborhood into a commercial complex, five-star hotel, penthouses, and a luxury mall designed for the elite. But hearing her say it out loud suddenly made it feel hollow. You're pretty sharp, he said, his voice softening slightly. But if you hate people like me so much, why are you still standing here talking? Wren shrugged, tossing her spray can in the air and catching it with ease. Because you're standing in front of my painting, and I don't like anyone looking at it like they're about to appraise it. Lucian looked at her, really looked, not like a business partner or a promising investment. There was something about her different. Not the polished beauty he was used to at high-end galas, but a raw, fiery life force that could burn down everything he knew. And for the first time in years, Lucian felt something stir. Curiosity, a sensation he thought he'd long outgrown. What's your name? He asked, barely realizing he'd said it aloud. Wren raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting the question. Wren Callahan. And you, Mr. Fancy Suit? Lucian Thorne, he replied, waiting for the usual reaction. Surprise, reverence, maybe even flattery. But Wren just smirked. Sounds like the name of a Hollywood villain, she said, turning away with a wave. Bye, Lucian Thorne. Don't ruin my neighborhood. She walked off, leaving Lucian standing there, one hand in his pocket, eyes fixed on her retreating figure. He didn't know why, but something about the way she called him a walking suit with no soul made him want to prove her wrong, or worse, made him want to see her again. As he got back into the car, the streetlight cast long shadows through the window, and Lucian murmured to himself, Wren Callahan, you'll be seeing me again. Wren Callahan sat on an old wooden crate in the alley behind the Arts District, her brush moving swiftly across the worn surface of a skateboard. Blue and red paint splattered wildly, as if she were trying to paint out her rage. It had been 3 days since her encounter with the slick-suited man, Lucian Thorne, a name that sounded like it had been ripped straight out of a B-list superhero movie. She couldn't shake the image of his eyes, cold but laced with something else, curiosity. Don't ruin my neighborhood, she had said, and she genuinely hoped he'd listened. But deep down, Wren knew people like him never really cared. The sharp click of high heels on pavement pulled her out of her thoughts. A woman in a gray suit with her hair pulled into a tight bun appeared at the mouth of the alley, holding an iPad like a shield. Miss Callahan, the woman asked, her tone polite but rigid. Wren raised an eyebrow and set her brush down. Who's asking? I'm Elise, Mr. Lucian Thorne's assistant. He'd like to meet with you. Wren burst out laughing, the sound echoing down the alley. Mr. Fancy Suit? Oh, no thanks. I don't play fetch for bored billionaires. Elise didn't blink. Mr. Thorne has a job offer. He wants to hire you as a community liaison for his new development project. Wren stopped laughing. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Community liaison? Sounds like a fancy way to say he wants me as a human shield while he guts the neighborhood. Tell your boss I'm not interested. Elise pressed her lips together, clearly unused to being turned down. Mr. Thorne is serious. He believes your perspective could add value to the project. You'd be generously compensated. Oh, I bet, Wren said, standing and wiping paint on her ripped jeans. So generously, I'd forget you're planning to evict hundreds of poor families just to build penthouses for the elite, right? Elise opened her mouth to respond, but Wren had already turned away, grabbing her skateboard and walking off. Tell him to find someone else. I'm just a street rat, not some rich man's puppet. Lucian sat in his office on the 72nd floor of Thorne Tower, the light from the floor to ceiling windows casting long lines across his face. In front of him sat a 3D model of the future complex, gleaming towers, infinity pools, and an art center he hoped would soften accusations of his work being soulless. But his mind wasn't on the model. It was in that alley with the girl whose tangled hair and burning eyes threatened to set his whole world ablaze. She said no, Elise reported, standing at his desk. She called herself a street rat and said she's not a puppet. Lucian smirked, a rare expression. Street rat, he repeated as if savoring the phrase. She's right. She's not a puppet. That's exactly why I want her. Elise frowned. Sir, with all due respect, I don't understand. Miss Callahan has no credentials, no experience, and she clearly doesn't respect you. Why her? Lucian rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the glittering city below. Because she's the only person with the guts to call me a soulless machine to my face. I need that perspective, Elise. I need someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it hurts. Elise sighed, clearly unconvinced but too professional to argue. What would you like me to do next? Find her, bring her here, and this time tell her the project won't destroy her neighborhood, at least not entirely. I want her to believe she can make a difference. Wren didn't expect to see Elise again, especially not at the rundown community center on the corner, where she was helping a group of kids paint a graffiti mural on the wall. But when Elise appeared, this time holding an envelope instead of an iPad, Wren knew things had gotten serious. Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this, Elise said, handing her the envelope. Wren opened it, scanning the typed letter on Thorne Enterprises' letterhead. The message was brief. Lucian was offering her a position as the working-class representative to help ensure his project wouldn't erase the history and soul of the neighborhood. She'd have the power to give input on the design, propose community spaces, and even oversee the relocation process for families. The pay? A figure so high, Wren nearly dropped the letter. What the hell is this? Wren muttered. Is this guy insane? Elise gave a faint smile. Mr. Thorne isn't insane. He's curious about you, and he believes you can help. Wren stuffed the letter into her pocket, suspicion burning in her eyes. She didn't trust Lucian Thorne. People like him always had hidden agendas. But then she looked at the kids laughing near the mural, thought of the families in this neighborhood. The ones who had given her a home when she had nothing after her mother died. If she said no, who would fight for them? Who would make sure they weren't kicked out? Fine, Wren said firmly. I'll do it, but not for the money, and definitely not for your boss. I'm doing it for this neighborhood, and if he thinks he can buy me, he's going to regret it. Elise nodded, visibly relieved. I'll schedule the meeting at his office for Monday. Wren smirked, picking up her skateboard. Good, but tell him I'm showing up as me. No suits, no sugarcoating, and if he doesn't like it, that's his problem. As Elise walked away, Wren glanced up at the night sky, her heart thudding faster than usual. She didn't know why, but the thought of facing Lucian Thorne again made her both nervous and excited. "Watch out, Mr. Fancy Suit," she muttered. "I'm coming to mess up your world." Wren Callahan stood in front of Thorn Tower, craning her neck to take in the gleaming panels of glass stabbing into the sky. The building looked like a spaceship from another planet, cold, distant, and exactly the kind of place Lucian Thorn, Mr. Fancy Suit himself, would call home. She wore ripped jeans with holes at the knees, a faded indie band t-shirt, and her messy brown hair was tied back with a stretched-out elastic. Tucked under her arm was her scuffed-up skateboard. "What the hell am I doing here?" she muttered, then took a deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby of Thorn Enterprises was a symphony of luxury: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and employees gliding past in tailored suits like programmed robots. Wren felt like a fish flung into the middle of a desert. The receptionist, a blonde with a perfect blowout, eyed her from head to toe, visibly baffled. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yup," Wren smirked, slapping her skateboard down on the counter with a loud clack that made the girl jump. "Wren Callahan, with your big boss, Lucian Thorn." The woman quickly typed something into her computer, then handed Wren a visitor badge, her eyes still glued to the paint-splattered boots. 72nd floor. Elevator's that way." As Wren stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the steel doors. "Good luck, street rat," she muttered and hit the button. The 72nd floor felt like another universe. Lucian's office was as big as a soccer field, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Manhattan. A team of staff buzzed around a gleaming 3D model of the complex, others tapping on tablets and analyzing data. When Wren walked in, the room practically held its breath. A guy in a gray suit dropped his coffee. An older woman adjusted her glasses and stared like Wren had landed from Mars. Lucian stood at the far end, hands in his pockets, listening to an assistant's update. He wore a navy suit without a wrinkle, his black hair styled like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes. When he looked up and saw her, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a knowing, amused smile. "Miss Callahan," he said, voice smooth and low. "I didn't think you'd actually come." Wren shrugged, dropping her skateboard to the floor with a thud that made a few people flinch. "Didn't want to, Mr. Fancy Suit, but I'm here for my neighborhood, not for you." Lucian motioned for his team to leave. Within seconds, the room was empty, leaving only the two of them and the gleaming model at the center of the table. He walked closer, his eyes sweeping over her, messy hair, worn boots. "You know, this is the first time anyone's brought a skateboard into my office. And probably the last if you're planning to turn my neighborhood into a Disneyland for rich people," Wren replied, arms crossed. "Let's cut to the chase. What do you want from me? A mascot to make your project look less evil?" Lucian raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to being challenged on his home turf. He pointed to the model. "This is the complex, 5-star hotel, luxury condos, and art center. I want your input, especially on how to preserve the soul of the neighborhood, as you called it." Wren stepped forward and leaned over the model. Sparkling glass towers, no trace of the old brick alleys, the graffiti murals, or the community center that had once given her hope in her darkest days. She looked up, eyes sharp as blades. "This doesn't preserve the soul. This erases memories and history. You think a shiny art center makes up for displacing hundreds of families?" Lucian's lips pressed together, but he didn't get angry. Instead, he tilted his head, curiosity flashing in his eyes. "You make me sound like a Hollywood villain. I'm not evicting anyone, Wren. I'm relocating them, with better living conditions." "Oh, how generous," Wren scoffed, leaning on the table. "You dump them in some far-off slum and call it relocation, then pat yourself on the back. Have you ever lived in a place where every corner tells a story? Or do you only know how to count money and build glass?" Lucian laughed, a deep, warm sound that even surprised him. "You really are a storm, Wren Callahan. I'm beginning to see why I hired you." Wren frowned, unsure whether he was mocking her or giving a compliment. "Don't try to charm me, Mr. Fancy Suit. I'm here to make sure you don't destroy everything I care about." "And I'm here to prove you wrong," Lucian replied, stepping closer. The distance between them shrank, and Wren suddenly caught the scent of his cologne, sandalwood with a hint of bergamot, refined but not overpowering. She stepped back, heart pounding for no reason she could name. Fine, she said, her tone stiff to mask her unease. You want me to work? Show me the relocation plan. I want to see exactly what you're doing with the people being affected. Lucian nodded and gestured to a sleek leather chair. She ignored it, choosing to stand, skateboard still tucked under her arm. He opened a file on his tablet and handed it to her. This is the preliminary plan. New housing, financial support, and job priority within the complex. Wren skimmed through it, her expression softening slightly. The plan was better than she expected, but she still didn't trust it. Sounds good on paper, but I want to see it happen, and I want the community center preserved. It's not just a building, Lucian. It's the heart of the neighborhood. He looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to decipher a complicated painting. You actually care, don't you? Not for money, not for clout, just for that place. Wren shrugged, turning her face away so he wouldn't see the flicker of emotion in her eyes. What's so weird about that? Not everyone lives in a gilded cage like you. Lucian was silent for a moment, then smiled. Not the usual polite smirk, but something genuine that lit up his whole face. You know, Wren, you might be the only person here who makes me want to be better. Wren shot him a glare, but the corner of her mouth twitched up. Don't get your hopes up, Mr. Fancy Suit. I still don't like you. Not yet, Lucian said, voice dropping lower, eyes locking on hers. But I'll change your mind. She shook her head, muttering something about egotistical billionaires. But as she walked out of the office, Wren couldn't deny it. Lucian Thorne, for all his arrogance, was starting to make her curious. Dangerously so. Lucian Thorne sat in his office, the golden hue of sunset spilling across the towering glass windows. He had sent Wren an invitation to dinner at Le Ciel, the most luxurious French restaurant in Manhattan, under the pretense of a work discussion. But if he was being honest, he wasn't entirely sure why he did it. Maybe it was the way she glared at him during their last meeting, calling him Mr. Fancy Suit with that infuriating half-smile. Maybe it was because she was the only person who dared to challenge him without an ounce of fear. Whatever the reason, Lucian knew tonight would be anything but boring. Wren, as expected, showed up to Le Ciel like a whirlwind. She walked in wearing a battered leather jacket, ripped jeans, and combat boots splattered with red and yellow paint. A gray beanie sat atop her head, and when she pulled it off, her messy brown hair spilled out. The entire restaurant, filled with guests in evening gowns and bespoke suits, turned to look. The maître d', a frail man in a tuxedo, nearly dropped his menu. Do you have a reservation? He asked, voice trembling. Wren smirked. Yup, with Lucian Thorne. Bet he's waiting to show off that ego the size of his skyscraper. Lucian, seated at a corner table with a view of the Hudson, chuckled when he heard her. He stood and gestured to the host. She's with me. Wren walked over, her eyes sweeping across Lucian's perfectly tailored black silk suit. You look like you sold your soul to the devil in exchange for that thing, she said, flopping into her chair without even glancing at the menu. And you look like you just escaped a punk rock show, Lucian replied, his eyes twinkling. But I won't complain. You make this room a lot less dull. Dinner began with red wine and appetizers Wren referred to as expensive tiny food. The conversation, unsurprisingly, quickly turned into verbal sparring. I reviewed your relocation plan, Wren said, pointing at him with her fork. Still no real community center. What you call public space is just playgrounds for the rich. Lucian sipped his wine, never taking his eyes off her. And what would you suggest? That I build a graffiti warehouse so you and your friends can spray paint freely? At least it would have soul, Wren shot back. You live in this gold-plated world, Lucian, but do you actually live? Or do you just exist, counting money and signing contracts, never feeling a damn thing? Lucian froze, his usual smirk fading. No one had ever asked him that, no one dared. You judge me like you know me, he said, his voice lowering. But you're not that different, Wren. You stand there criticizing everything I do. But do you have any real solutions beyond painting walls and complaining? Wren narrowed her eyes, her temper flaring. But then she laughed. It was a clear, unfiltered sound that made a few diners turn their heads. Touché, Mr. Fancy Suit. You win this round. But I'm not here to solve your problems. I'm here to remind you that neighborhood isn't your damn playground. Lucian looked at her, really looked. Under the soft lighting, her brown eyes glowed, not just with defiance, but with unshakable passion. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met, not like the polished women from his high society circles who smiled to please. Ren was real, fierce, and dangerous. You know, he said, leaning in, voice dropping, I'm starting to think hiring you was both the worst and best decision I've made. Ren raised an eyebrow and took a sip of wine. Worst because I drive you crazy, right? And best because... Lucian smiled slowly, meaningfully. Because you make me want to argue with you every day. Ren rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth curved upward. When dinner ended, they stepped out into the cold Manhattan night. Lucian offered her a ride, but Ren shook her head and hopped onto her skateboard. Thanks for dinner, devil in silk, she said with a wink, but I've got myself covered. As she rolled away, Lucian stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her disappear into the city. For the first time in years, his heart pounded. Not over a deal, not over victory, but because of a girl in paint-splattered boots. Ren stood in front of the community center, her heart clenched tight. The old brick wall, once covered in graffiti and life, was now surrounded by steel fencing and a glaring sign, Eviction Zone. The roar of an excavator echoed from the next block, tearing through her memories like a blade. This place had once been her light in the darkest days, where Mrs. Rosa, the center's director, had pulled her from the edge of addiction after her mother's death. Ren gripped her skateboard, fury blazing in her eyes. Lucian had promised to protect the soul of the neighborhood. But this was betrayal. She stormed into Thorn Tower without warning. When she burst into the conference room, Lucian was mid-presentation, standing before a cluster of investors, selling his vision of the future. Ren didn't care. She slammed her skateboard onto the table, startling everyone. You lied, she growled, pointing a trembling finger at Lucian. You said you'd protect the neighborhood, but you're destroying the community center. That place means everything to me. Lucien's brow furrowed. He raised a hand, dismissing the room. One by one, the investors filed out, casting glances back at the furious girl in combat boots. When the room emptied, he stepped toward her, his voice calm but heavy. Ren, I didn't know the center was part of the eviction zone. I'll look into it. Look into it, she snapped, her voice cracking with emotion. You don't get it, Lucian. That place isn't just a building. It saved me when I had nothing. After my mom died, I nearly OD'd. That center, they gave me a reason to live. She turned away, blinking back tears, refusing to let him see her fall apart. Lucian stood still, shaken. He'd never seen Ren like this. Not sharp-tongued or defiant, but broken. And it hit him harder than any deal gone wrong. He took a breath, his voice raspier than usual. I understand. Ren shot him a bitter glare, wiping her face. Understand? What would you understand, penthouse prince? What do you know about loss? Lucian stepped closer, his eyes no longer distant or guarded. I understand, Ren, because I had nothing too. He paused as if wrestling with his past. I grew up in an orphanage. No family, no name. Just a number on a chart. Everything I have now, I built from nothing. But I've never forgotten what it felt like. To be empty. Ren blinked, stunned. Lucian Thorne, the most powerful man in Manhattan, had once been a nameless child. She wanted to scoff, to call it a lie. But his eyes, dark and raw, made her fall silent. I'm not telling you this for pity, Lucian continued, his voice gentler now. I'm telling you because I never meant to destroy something important to you. I'll stop the demolition, I promise. Ren stared at him, heart thudding. For the first time, she didn't see Mr. Fancy Suit or the devil in silk, but a man with scars of his own. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. Thank you. But if you tear that place down, I swear I'll burn your whole tower to the ground. Lucian laughed, the sound rich and disarming, breaking the heavy air between them. I believe you would, Ren Callahan. As she left the office, something shifted inside her. A strange connection to Lucian that went beyond the usual tension or banter. It was something unseen, stitched from shared wounds and battles neither had ever voiced aloud. She didn't know where it would lead, But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Wren Callahan never imagined she'd find herself standing in a luxury boardroom, arguing with a billionaire over saving a corner of the city covered in graffiti. But here she was, week 3 of working with Lucian Thorne, and every day it felt like her world was slipping off its axis. Lucian, with his tailored suits and ice-cold eyes, made her want to scream, and made her want to look at him just a little longer. It was maddening. Tonight they were working late, just the two of them, and a pile of relocation plans spread across the table. Wren, in her paint-stained hoodie and familiar combat boots, pointed at one design with sharp precision. "If you really want to preserve the community center," she said, "then don't shove it in a corner like some forgotten leftover. It needs space, Lucian. It needs to breathe." Lucian, sleeves rolled up, leaned over the table, so close Wren could smell his sandalwood cologne. "And I told you I will make it happen," he replied, voice low but steady. "But you have to give me time, Wren. This isn't just about painting a wall and calling it done." Wren shot him a glare, but her lips curled slightly. "Oh, please, Mr. Fancy Suit. Don't pretend you understand art. You just know how to sign checks and build glass towers." Lucian chuckled, the sound warm and disarming, enough to make Wren's heart stumble. "You know," he said, "I'm starting to enjoy your insults. They're honest." She turned away, pretending to study the floor plans, trying to hide the warmth rising to her cheeks. She hated the way he made her feel, like she was on a skateboard with no control. She hated his cold logic, the way he ran everything like a machine. But she couldn't deny that when he smiled, really smiled, she wanted to see it again. As the office lights dimmed, they moved to a leather sofa near the window. Lucian poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a sleek bar cart and handed her one. "No work talk," he said, sitting across from her. "Just conversation. Who are you, Wren Callahan, besides the girl who keeps threatening to burn down my tower?" Wren took a sip, eyes gleaming with challenge. "I'm a street artist, a rebel, and your personal nightmare. What about you? Who are you, Lucian Thorne, besides the CEO with the perfect jawline and a god complex?" Lucian fell quiet, gazing into his glass as if the answer lay in the amber liquid. "I don't really know anymore," he admitted, voice rough. "But lately I've realized something. I need to see you smile every day, and I don't know why." Wren froze, her glass hovering midair. His words hit her like a stone cast into still water. She wanted to laugh, to call him the devil in silk and kill the moment, but his eyes, dark, steady, sincere, held her still. They began to argue again, as always, about everything from the relocation plans to how he described French appetizers as elegant bites. But this time, there was something different. Every glance, every word hummed with electricity. When Wren got up to retrieve another drawing, she clipped the edge of the table. Lucian caught her instantly, his hand closing around her arm. Time seemed to stop. They stood there barely an inch apart, their breaths mingling. Lucian's gaze locked onto hers, and Wren could feel her heartbeat pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. He leaned in, closer, closer still, and she knew exactly what was about to happen. A part of her wanted it to. But then she remembered who he was, what he controlled, what he could destroy with just a signature. She pulled away, her voice trembling. "No, Lucian, I'm not doing this." Before he could speak, Wren grabbed her skateboard and rushed out of the office, leaving Lucian standing there, his heart pounding, for something he'd never felt before. Wren stood outside the community center, heart splintering as she watched the scene unfold. Steel fencing still wrapped around the building, but now bulldozers had started tearing into the graffiti-covered wall, the very one she and the kids had painted together. Just a week ago, Lucian had promised to protect this place. Just a week ago, she believed him. Not the CEO, but the man named Lucian, the one who'd opened up about his lonely childhood. But now it all felt like a lie. She had learned the truth from a headline that morning. Thorne Enterprises approve full redevelopment of Lower East Side. Despite Lucian's promises, he had signed off on the project. The article cited pressure from shareholders. It felt like a knife to the gut. She had trusted him, let him into her world, and he'd betrayed her. She stormed into his office without knocking. Lucian was seated behind his desk, eyes heavy with exhaustion, a pile of documents in front of him. He stood when he saw her, but Ren raised a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said, her voice colder than steel. "You promised, Lucian. You said you'd protect the community center, but you chose money, just like every other rich guy." Lucian drew in a breath and stepped closer. "Ren, it's not what you think. I didn't have a choice. The shareholders—" "Shareholders?" She cut him off, her eyes wet with fury. "Don't blame them. You're Lucian Thorne. You run everything, but you chose to destroy the one place that saved me. The one place hundreds of people call home. You're nothing but a machine, Lucian. I was wrong to think you had a heart." Her words landed like a blow to his chest. He wanted to explain, to tell her he had fought the board, that he was trying to save the center through back channels. But when he looked into her eyes, shining with betrayal, he knew no excuse could make this right. "Ren, I quit," she said, tossing her security badge onto his desk. "I'm done with you. Done with this project. Goodbye, Lucian." She turned and walked out, leaving Lucian standing there, feeling, for the first time in his life, like he'd lost something that truly mattered. The next day, rain poured over Manhattan in relentless sheets. Lucian stood outside the community center, coat soaked, suit abandoned. He'd canceled his board meeting to be here, to find her. Ren sat in an alley nearby, hunched over her skateboard, painting through the storm. Her eyes were empty. When she saw him, she stood, gripping the board like a shield. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice flat. "Ren, Lucian's voice caught. His hair was plastered to his forehead, rain dripping from his jaw. For the first time, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't in control. He was just Lucian, someone who'd let the most important person walk away. "I don't want to lose you." Ren laughed bitterly, without humor. "Lose me? You don't own me, Lucian. You can't buy everything. Not this neighborhood, and definitely not me." She stepped forward, her eyes like knives. "You made your choice, and it wasn't me." Lucian reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I was wrong," he said, voice hoarse. "I'll make it right. I'll stop the project, Ren. Just stay." But Ren shook her head, tears mixing with rain. "It's too late, Lucian. I can't trust you anymore." She jumped on her board and skated into the downpour, leaving him standing there, drenched and alone, for the first time in his life, utterly powerless. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. A storm raged across Manhattan, rain pounding the streets and wind howling through the alleys. Lucian Thorne gripped the steering wheel of his Bentley, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the blurry road ahead. He hadn't slept since Ren walked out. Her words, "You can't buy everything, Lucian," played on repeat in his head like a haunting melody. He had failed, and now he had to find her, had to tell her he was ready to give up everything to make things right. He drove through the Lower East Side, the alleyways, the community center, the graffiti-covered walls, all soaked and shimmering like the city was crying with him. He stopped in front of the center, stepped out into the storm, and yelled into the wind, "Ren!" No answer, just the roar of the storm. He climbed back into the car, mind spinning with memories. The almost kiss in the office, the pain in her eyes, the moment she called him out for choosing power over people. "I'll fix it," he whispered, pressing the gas. But the storm didn't care. From the intersection, headlights flared. A truck barreled through the red light. Lucian turned the wheel, but too late. Metal screamed. Glass shattered, and the world went dark. Ren sat in the alley, soaked through her hoodie, skateboard by her side. She wanted to forget Lucian, forget the way it felt when he betrayed her trust. But then her phone rang, an unknown number. "Elise," she said when she answered. "Miss Callahan." The assistant's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Thorne. He's been in an accident. He's at St. Luke's." Ren felt her heart stop. "Accident?" she echoed, barely breathing. Elise gave the address, nothing more. Ren snatched her skateboard and flew down the rain-slicked streets, eyes burning, lungs tight. She didn't think. She just went. At the hospital, Wren burst into the ICU, clothes clinging to her, hair dripping. Lucian lay still in the hospital bed, head wrapped in bandages, machines beeping steadily. He looked fragile, no longer the untouchable billionaire, but a man fighting to survive. She sank into the chair beside him, hands trembling as she reached for his. "You idiot," she whispered, tears falling freely. "Why were you out in a storm? Why did you have to scare me like this?" She hadn't known how afraid she was of losing him until now. All their arguments, her nicknames for him, Mr. Fancy Suit, Devil in Silk, they weren't just banter. They were memories she wanted to keep. She held his hand tighter, voice soft and broken. "Don't leave me, Lucian. I haven't told you yet. I need you too." Lucian's eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes, dazed, but they found her immediately. "Wren," he whispered, barely audible. "Don't go again." Wren choked back a sob, leaning forward until her forehead touched his hand. "I'm here," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucian recovered slowly in the hospital, but his mind never rested. The accident had changed him, not just the scars on his body, but the moment he woke to see Wren by his side, eyes red, her hand gripping his. She had stayed even after everything, and he knew then, more clearly than he ever had before, that Wren was something he couldn't afford to lose. More than any contract, more than any skyscraper. 1 month later, Lucian returned to Thorn Tower, still weak but more determined than ever. He called an emergency board meeting with the investors and executives. Standing in front of the model of the development, the gleaming glass towers that had once been his dream, he made a shocking announcement. "We're terminating the current contracts," he said, voice firm. "The old neighborhood stays. We're rebuilding, but this time it's for the people. Community centers, art spaces, affordable housing. This is no longer a profit-driven project. This is about people." The room erupted in chaos. Some shareholders shouted about losing hundreds of millions, but Lucian stood his ground. "If you disagree, withdraw your investment," he said. "I'll fund it myself." He knew it could ruin his empire, but for the first time, he didn't care. He was doing this for Wren, for the neighborhood, and for himself, the orphan boy who once had nothing but a dream. Wren by now no longer worked for Thorn Enterprises. She had returned to the alleyways, painting again, teaching kids graffiti. She tried not to think about Lucian, but every brushstroke reminded her of him. His deep eyes, his rare smile, the words, "Don't go again," whispered in a hospital room. She told herself she hadn't forgiven him, but her heart told another story. One afternoon, Elise showed up and handed her an invitation. "Mr. Thorne would like you to attend an event," she said. Wren frowned, ready to say no, but curiosity won. She arrived at the address, a cleared lot in the old neighborhood, now strung with soft, glowing lights. A small stage had been built, and Lucian stood atop it, not in a suit, but in a white shirt and jeans, looking more human than ever. "Wren," he said when he saw her, his face lighting up. In front of a crowd of local residents, street artists, and press, Lucian announced the launch of a new artist grant, the Callahan Fund. "This is to honor the girl who changed the way I see the world," he said, locking eyes with Wren. "She taught me that a neighborhood isn't just land and brick, it's stories and people." Wren stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes. She never imagined Lucienne would go this far, giving up profit, rebuilding the community as she had dreamed, using his power to preserve street art. As the crowd applauded, Lucian stepped down and walked toward her. "I was wrong, Wren," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want to make it right. Not just for the neighborhood, for you. I don't want to own you, Wren. I just want to be beside you." Wren looked at him, heart racing. She wanted to be angry, to push him away, but she couldn't. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "You're such an idiot, Mr. Fancy Suit. But I guess I'm an idiot too, because I love you." Lucian smiled, pulling her closer, and under the twinkling lights they both knew they'd found a new world, one not built by either of them alone, but forged together. Wren Callahan stood in front of the newest building in the Lower East Side, eyes wide with wonder. It wasn't a towering structure like Lucian's other projects, but a modest, thoughtfully designed building. The exterior was covered with carefully preserved graffiti art, and large windows welcomed sunlight inside. The sign above read, Callahan Gallery. Her name. Her heart thudded in her chest like the whole world had just paused. Lucian had invited her to see something special, but she hadn't expected this. Dressed in her usual paint-streaked hoodie and worn boots, skateboard tucked under one arm, Wren stepped inside. The space was open and bright, with white walls displaying artwork from local street artists, friends, collaborators, and students she had painted beside over the years. But in the center of the room, under a soft spotlight, hung one piece that made her gasp. Her first graffiti mural, painted when she was 16, messy, emotional, and full of raw heart. She thought it had been destroyed during the near demolition of the community center. She turned and saw Lucian standing behind her. No suit, just a white shirt and jeans, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. How do you have this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I kept it," Lucian said, stepping forward. "When I first saw it, I didn't know it was yours. But I felt something in it, a story. And when I learned it was you, I couldn't let it go. Just like I couldn't let you go." Tears streamed down Wren's cheeks. She rushed into his arms, holding him tight. "You idiot, Mr. Fancy Suit! Who makes me cry like this?" Lucian chuckled, running his fingers through her hair. "I don't want to make you cry, Wren. I want to make you happy." Then he stepped back, dropped to one knee, and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside wasn't a flashy diamond, but a delicate silver ring holding a small blue stone, carved from her old skateboard, polished to a shine. "Wren Callahan," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You knocked my world off course. I won't promise you the whole world. You already have yours. But I will spend my life building a new one with you. Will you marry me?" Wren covered her mouth, laughing and crying all at once. She nodded through her tears, and Lucian slipped the ring onto her finger. She pulled him up, kissing him beneath the soft lights and vibrant murals. "You're such a romantic fool," she whispered, "but I love you." The crowd outside, artists, neighbors, and Elise, burst into applause. Still holding Lucian, Wren grinned. "Don't think for a second I'm wearing a sparkly wedding dress. Devil in silk." Lucian laughed, wrapping his arms around her. "I don't need a dress, I just need you." Here is the American English translation, with accurate grammar and fidelity to the original meaning. The sky was a flawless blue over the Lower East Side, sunlight pouring across graffiti-covered walls at the community center. Today was Wren Callahan and Lucian Thorne's wedding day, and the small courtyard had been transformed with string lights, wildflowers, and soft linen fabric fluttering in the breeze. There was no grand ballroom or symphony orchestra, but the community center, the place they had rebuilt together, was filled with laughter, music, and the love of the neighborhood residents. Lucian stood at the end of the aisle in a white linen shirt and jeans, relaxed but still undeniably striking. He was nervous, eyes gleaming as he looked toward the entrance where Wren would appear. He had prepared himself for the everyday Wren, hoodie, ripped jeans, and paint-splattered boots, and he didn't mind. To him, she was always the most beautiful storm. But when Wren stepped out, the crowd fell silent before erupting in gasps of surprise. She wore a traditional wedding gown, pure white, with a sheer veil that lightly traced her figure. The dress wasn't extravagant, but its elegant cut highlighted her natural beauty, like a work of art framed by the city streets. Her usually messy brown hair was gently waved and crowned with a wildflower wreath. Her brown eyes sparkled, and her soft smile made it impossible to look away. On her hand, the blue stone ring crafted from an old skateboard glinted in the sunlight, a rebellious signature on her graceful look. Lucian stood frozen, his heart pounding. "Wren," he whispered, voice cracking. "Are you an angel?" Wren approached, cheeks slightly flushed, but her eyes twinkled mischievously. "Don't get dreamy on me, Mr. Fancy Pants," she said, winking. "I just wanted to show you a different version of Wren. But inside, I'm still the girl who'd burn your building down if I had to." The crowd, neighbors, street artists, and even Elise, wiping away tears, burst into laughter. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. A street musician friend of Ren's strummed a soft ballad on his guitar. Ren and Lucian exchanged vows. Not poetic, but honest. I used to think I had everything, Lucian said, holding her hand, eyes locked on her gentle face. But you showed me what it means to really live. I promise to stand by you. Whether you're in a wedding dress or a hoodie, even if you keep calling me a silken demon. Ren smiled, tears glittering in her eyes. You turned my world upside down, Lucian Thorne, she said softly, but I promise to love you, whether or not you try to lure me into fancy restaurants. And thank you for making me want to wear a dress today. They exchanged rings and kissed to cheers and applause. Their kiss was tender, yet fierce, as if sealing a future that belonged to both of them. Ren, in her white dress, looked like a fairy tale bride. But when she winked at Lucian, he knew she was still the same bold street girl who had thrown his world off its axis. The wedding reception was an outdoor feast, food truck, tacos, craft beer, and a graffiti wall where kids from the community center could paint freely. Ren and Lucien danced, not a waltz, but a messy, spontaneous dance full of laughter as she playfully tripped him. Her white dress floated in the wind, and Lucian couldn't take his eyes off her. You look stunning, he whispered, pulling her close. Don't get used to it, Ren replied, leaning into his chest with a smile. I might wear a hoodie for our anniversary next year. As night fell, they sat on a wooden bench under a sky full of stars. Ren, still in her wedding gown, rested her head on Lucian's shoulder. We did it, didn't we? She asked gently. Not your world, not mine, but ours. Lucian kissed her hair, the faint scent of wildflowers in the air. And this world will always have room for wedding dresses, skateboards, and graffiti. Ren laughed, lacing her fingers with his, the blue ring gleaming under the moonlight. They were no longer opposites. They were Ren and Lucian, a love story painted in spray paint, glass, and dreams that refused to fade. 2 years after the wedding, the Lower East Side had become a vibrant art hub with the community center and Callahan Gallery at its heart. Ren Callahan, now Ren Callahan Thorne, was no longer just an anonymous street artist. Her name had appeared in international art magazines, from Art Forum to Juxtapose, hailed as the graffiti flame who redefined street art. But to Ren, success wasn't the press or the praise. It was being able to paint, to live, and to inspire the people around her, especially the kids in the neighborhood. Today marked the opening of the biggest exhibition of her career, Street Stories, hosted at Callahan Gallery. It didn't just showcase her work, but also that of young street artists she had mentored through the Callahan Fund, founded by Lucian. Ren stood outside the building in her signature look, an oversized white shirt, ripped jeans, and paint-splattered boots, still true to herself, even if she had grown to love the dress from that special day. The bluestone ring shimmered on her hand, a reminder of Lucienne and the journey they had shared. Inside the gallery, the walls were bursting with color, graffiti pieces telling stories of the neighborhood, of loss, hope, and love. At the center hung Ren's newest work, a massive painting of the community center, kids painting graffiti, Mrs. Rosa smiling, and a blurred figure of Lucian in the corner, gazing at her with gentle eyes. Is that me? Lucian asked, appearing beside her in his usual linen shirt and jeans, no trace of the old Mr. Suit. Ren winked. Yeah, but I made you blurry, so no one thinks you're the main character. This is the neighborhood story, not the Millionaires. Lucian laughed, pulling her into his arms. I'm fine being your background, my storm. He kissed her forehead, and Ren leaned into him, soaking in the warmth. The exhibition exceeded expectations. Art critics, collectors, neighborhood locals, and street artists from around the world all gathered. Ren stepped onto the small stage, not nervous at all, even though she once thought she'd freeze in front of a crowd. Thank you all for coming, she said, voice clear. This exhibit isn't about me. It's about the neighborhood that saved me, about the people who gave me a family when I had nothing, and about the man who believed a street rat like me could change the world. She looked at Lucian, her eyes sparkling, and he smiled, heart pounding like the first time he saw her. As she shared her journey from addiction and losing her mother to finding light through art, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. A critic from the New York Times later wrote, Wren Callahan doesn't just paint. She paints the soul of the streets, and that's why she's a legend. After the event, Wren and Lucian strolled hand in hand through the neighborhood. They stopped by the community center, where kids were painting a new wall under the guidance of a young artist Wren had trained. I did it, didn't I? Wren asked softly, watching the vibrant strokes on the wall. Lucian turned to her, pride in his eyes. You didn't just do it, Wren. You changed everything. This neighborhood, street art, me. I thought I built worlds, but you're the one who created this one. Wren shrugged, her smile radiant. Don't get all poetic on me, Silk Devil. But thank you for keeping my first painting, for believing in me, and for loving even my messiest parts. They sat on a wooden bench, listening to laughter echo around them. Wren pulled out a small spray can, shook it, and grinned at Lucian. Want to paint something? Or are you still scared of getting your shirt dirty? Lucian laughed, snatching the can. Careful, Mrs. Thorne. I might paint better than you. He sprayed a clumsy line on a blank corner of the wall, and Wren burst out laughing, jumping in to help. Together they created a colorful, lopsided heart. As night fell, they stood before the wall, paint on their hands, eyes locked. This world is ours, isn't it? Wren asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Always, Lucian replied, kissing her hair. And you're its greatest artist. Wren smiled, holding his hand, the blue ring glinting under the streetlight. She had made it, not because of headlines or galleries, but because she had turned the streets into murals of hope and made Lucian's heart her home.